So I've been away for 3 weeks now, and so much has happened. I couldn't possibly do any of it justice, but I did want to share with you something I saw today from Status Quo about the Daunte Wright protests. Daunte Wright was a young black man who was executed by the police, by the militarized police, who regularly execute black people and have been doing that for decades. And of course, before that, you know, as I've mentioned before, the militia groups became the KKK that became the police. So anyway, this is yet another person doing nothing, another black person doing nothing and getting executed by the police. So there are, and this is almost a year ago that George Floyd was executed by the Derek Chauvin, and of course there has been killings during that time, and this is just another one in a long string of what ends up being executions by police that pretty much always get away with it, unless, as I mentioned before, your name is Muhammad and you've killed a white woman, a white Australian woman, then you go to prison. But basically, they rarely ever go to prison. It becomes clearer and clearer to me how it's coming together, the way the US empire treats people overseas, black and brown people overseas, in the target countries of the empire. And that includes, of course, US empire's very close ally, Israel, how Israel treats Palestinians. It's becoming more and more sort of, you can see it sort of closing in like this, the way empire treats people overseas, the way Israel absolutely brutalizes and murders Palestinians with impunity again and again and again. And this is sort of something that it's like imperialism more and more is coming home to roost. And you see the Home Guard. Biden, of course, is just continuing on Trump's policies, but pretending like he's some kind of kinder, gentler, thank goodness for President Biden kind of nonsense that a lot of the blue check people and a lot of the corporate Democrats and their sort of cult followers, like the cult followers of AOC and those kind of people, they all seem to think that Biden is going to be different or is different than Donald Trump, when really he's not. And in fact, the warmongering that's going on at the present time is so intense, it's really hard to keep up with it, really. It's done in a more sophisticated way and in a more well-spoken way than with Donald Trump and his administration, but it is actually escalated almost from the day one. And the way black people are going to be treated in the future is going to be exactly the same, except if you could draw a cartoon, Eve is sitting on my lap, if you could draw a cartoon of what's really going on right now, it would be, on the right you would have the corporate media with their foot on the heads of black people and leftist journalism, on independent journalists and pushing them underwater, and you have Silicon Valley with their foot on the heads of black people and poor people in general, and independent journalism, and you have the government with their foot, both sides, the duopoly, both sides of the aisle, or you could say one big party, the duopoly, with their foot on the heads of independent journalists, black people, poor people in general, and that's sort of really how it is. And you've also got the protection of white supremacists ongoing. You know, there's the right wing, of course, with their foot on the heads of anybody who is not endorsing white supremacy, endorsing basically fascism. I'm talking about the far right with their foot on the heads of journalists, independent journalists, and black people and poor people and all of that. So there is a mighty opposition to any sort of movement, any sort of people's movement, by a number of factors. But in the end, we will prevail, because it is impossible for a movement that is already started, particularly with young people. It is impossible for that now to be stopped. It's unstoppable. Of course, things can get way worse than they have been before it gets better. But I actually am quite optimistic that not only internally, not only domestically in the United States do I feel that things are, of course they're going to get worse than before they get better, but I think at this point the people's movement is unstoppable, because the powers that be, the oligarchy, the capitalist class, the 1%, have basically become so greedy that they've forgotten to basically just keep the masses in tow by giving them a few crumbs and making them feel a little bit like they're taken care of under this rapacious death machine, which is capitalism. They've forgotten to do that, and that is their undoing. And as capitalism is inextricably linked with imperialism, as fascism is capitalism in decay, you have now the US empire is flailing around like a wounded monster, basically trying to threaten, with almost both their ankles broken, really, is trying to threaten a number of countries, not really fully grasping that the countries like China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and other countries who are all joining together with them are basically now becoming so allied and supportive of one another against crippling acts of war, that's economic sanctions, against the constant serious saber rattling now by Antony Blinken and the Biden administration. I mean, we're talking dangerously, seriously frightening warmongering now towards China and Russia. But these countries have allied now together. China actually allying with Iran to the point of saying for the next 40 years they're going to give them, I think, $400 billion with a B dollars, and then Iran is going to share their agriculture with China. So basically China in some ways has rescued Iran from these crippling economic sanctions that the US has put on, the worst economic sanctions, I think, since what was put on Iraq in the 90s, where economic sanctions by the US killed 500,000 children. And Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State at the time, said, when asked, was it worth it? She said, yes, it was worth it. This is the kind of sadistic, awful empire that the world is dealing with. But these economic sanctions, this 800 economic sanctions on Iran, are being circumvented in many ways by China with this deal that they have made now for the next 40 years with Iran to basically $400 billion, and of course helping them out with during COVID, and probably like they're doing around the rest of the world, helping with infrastructure and all that kind of thing. Something that the US is trying to destroy, something that the US is basically trying to destroy Iran and any country that is not submitting to them. So I feel quite optimistic, really. You know, what's happening domestically in the US, I feel it's turning around because young people are thinking, I'm not going to take this capitalist nonsense anymore, and they're starting to move towards socialism. I'm not saying socialism is the answer, because the change comes from within ourselves. You know, you can have any system you want, but if we're not actually moving to a different consciousness about the planet, about other animals, and I mean going vegan, about some sort of vision of what we want, then it's not going to make any difference what system is in place. And it's certainly not going to make any difference if we're able to, and I don't believe we'll ever get there because of because of climate crisis and all of that, but people seeming to think that it'll all be better on Mars or somewhere else. We take our dysfunction with us. So anyway, but within the US, I feel like there is a definite unstoppable movement now, because the capitalist class, the 1%, the oligarchy, the people in charge, the establishment basically have made the big mistake and forgotten what happened in the French Revolution, that you can only put your foot on the necks of people so much and leave them completely destitute before it all turns around and people won't take it anymore. And it doesn't even require any sort of independent media to bring those facts to people. They feel it on a visceral level, and that's what's happening right now. And it once there's a certain percentage of the population feel that, which they do already, it becomes unstoppable. And as I said, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, unfortunately. And it may even just go straight into fascism in the next 8 years, because Joe Biden is a crypto-fascist, and he's continuing on all the awfulness as a seamless thread throughout every administration. And he's trying to do it on the sly, basically doing just continuing on the oppression and trying to destroy via Silicon Valley and whatever else, independent journalism and all of that. So, and then the imperialist aims of the US empire are absolutely, just like the Roman Empire, overstretched, overreached and ended up falling. The US empire is flailing around now, and as I said, these allies are getting together, and it's like a big schoolyard with a bully that's left in the corner shouting and screaming and doing a tanty, and so all the people that were being bullied by this particular bully are all joining together and turning their backs on that sadistic bully, and organizing themselves and being in solidarity, so that this sadistic bully has no power anymore. And that's what's happening with US empire. And hooray for that is all I can say, because the world can only take so much of this, and even if it is too late, even if the climate crisis is going to get us at the end, at least we may have at some point some sort of civility or some sort of multipolar world where we don't have an empire going around stomping on the heads of everybody who won't just submit and let their country and their people be destroyed, so that they can go in and keep this capitalist death machine continuing on. Capitalism is an ecocidal system, and it can only be that, but within capitalism it has its own destruction, and we're seeing it right now. So anyway, back to the the BLM protests, and I'm not talking about the organization Black Lives Matter, which has a lot of problems. I'm talking about the actual protests. This is like the spear tip in a way of this movement, that people are waking up. Even with the suppression of independent media, people are waking up. And so imperialism and what's happening right now in the US, what the US is doing to countries overseas, and what they're doing to their own people right now during COVID, and what they're allowing to happen, the state is allowing to happen to black people over and over and over again. It's all it's all sort of in many ways similar, and that's why everybody who is pushing against what happened to Daunte, Wright, and all the many black people, and also the incarcerated black people who are used as basically for slavery, to make Victoria's Secret type things and be in call centers and all of that. This modern day slavery in the prisons, the private prisons. We have to become internationalists, and we have to recognize that anti-racism doesn't end at any border. If we're truly anti-racist, then we have to care about what's happening to other people in other countries, and that means that we have to be anti-imperialist and anti-war, because what is happening in other countries to other people, to black and brown people overseas, if we don't care about that, can we truly call ourselves anti-racist? So we have to recognize that all the people who are protesting and who are appalled at what's happening within the borders of the US, to black and brown people, to people at the borders, young children who are being victimized by the state just for the fact that they are people of color, and because the state can do that and then use them also as cheap labor, all that kind of thing. If we aren't against what's happening overseas in imperialist wars conducted by the US ongoing, if we aren't against the sanctions, these crippling economic sanctions, which are an act of war in other countries like Venezuela and Iran, etc., then we cannot really call ourselves anti-racist. And I don't like the word progressive, but people call themselves progressive, but they don't seem to care about the imperialist wars, of which there are at least 8, and it's just ongoing, and it's just all over Africa now. The US has got AFRICOM, and they're trying to use that as a base to conduct wars elsewhere, and to conduct wars within Africa and countries in Africa. It's so, until we recognize that it's a international struggle against US empire, this colonialist, rapacious empire, until we recognize that, we're not going to be able to stand and look at the bully and basically say game over. We have to all unite. We all have to all be in solidarity, so that we can turn our backs on this insane, insatiable bully, US empire. Turn our backs and make them completely irrelevant, and make them basically spin themselves into the ground, which is kind of what they're doing right now. And that's a very dangerous thing too, because I'm concerned that depending on who is in power and the kind of sociopaths and psychopaths in power, if it's either going to end up in a mushroom cloud at some point, because they will refuse to go down without taking everybody else down, or they're not as insane as that, but in a different sort of insanity think that they can win anyway without doing that. But it is of concern to wondering whether they think, well, if we can't be the unipolar and have power and have full spectrum dominance over the planet, then we're going to take everybody with us in a mushroom cloud, or thinking that they can use tactical nuclear weapons and just target certain areas in China and Russia and then try and change the dynamics of what's happening now. I have no idea, but I feel like things are so unhinged these days that nothing would surprise me. But anyway, becoming internationalists is absolutely vital, and also not having just only interests in anti-racism in our own countries. That's not only selective and also kind of a bit, in some ways, selfish, but it's not going to win in the end, that attitude, because we don't live, these are all artificial borders. These are all artificial borders. There's different borders throughout the world. Some have just been made in political sense so that there can be chaos created and control. But these borders mean nothing. We're all humans on the planet, and there's also a population, a much greater population of non-humans that we need to include by going vegan and stop oppressing, stop exploiting, stop torturing and killing them for trivial reasons of mostly palate pleasure. We need to not only think of ourselves as human beings and not Australians or US citizens, etc. We need to think of ourselves as humans, and we need to consider non-human animals. They are fellow earthlings, and they are sentient, and they deserve our respect, and that means going vegan and stop exploiting and killing them. So until we start this consciousness change that I talk about, which is something that we need to do rather than thinking that another system is going to save us, until we address our dysfunction, that is our speciesism, that is our violence, that is our need to have control, or our selfishness, our greediness and all of that, until we address that, nothing really proper is ever going to change. Until we recognize the interconnectedness of everything, nothing significant is ever going to change. Until we realize that going to another planet isn't going to change anything, we're taking our dysfunction with us. Wherever you go, there you are, that saying, Zen saying. So until we realize that, then nothing significant is ever going to change, and nothing significant, nothing of importance, nothing long-lasting is ever going to change. So check these next two videos out from Status Quo with this. One is a young black man speaking to the National Guard on the other side of the fence, which is he's saying some important things, and then a little bit of commentary from Jordan Chariton and Jen Dyes. Consider subscribing to their YouTube channel and supporting them financially. One of many independent journalist sources that benefits from our support, because without independent journalism we have almost no semblance of democracy whatsoever. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. Please stay tuned for these next two excerpts. Till next time, my name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Bye for now.
I don't know if y'all got kids or family or anything, but take that shit personal. It don't got nothing to do with color. It don't got nothing. He was a father. That's the first thing I think about. He was a father. I know it's probably annoying to talk about, isn't it? It's probably annoying to be on y'all ass, isn't it? The captain telling you.
Oh, he's telling them. He's telling them to go back.
It's the captain telling you
that. He's telling them to go back.
Of course he is, because we niggas. That's why, because we niggas.
The shit that pissed him off, you white.
Because we niggas.
Don't want to talk to.
They don't want to talk to no nigger.
Man, fuck all y'all.
They don't want to talk to no nigger. It's facts. We've been doing this shit for 400 years. And every time we get met with resistance by y'all meet us with resistance while we dying. You know, you guys got open door policy. You guys can talk to people. Right. If somebody fucking tells you can't, you can go higher up. We're talking about y'all constitutional rights being violated. You've been in y'all troopers. 8 years. See, they're not going to talk. They're going to walk away. Yeah, y'all the military. They the real pussy. Y'all get $750 million for bullshit. It's harder. I was active duty. You're $750 billion for bullshit. I ain't done. I ain't done. I'm pissed. I'm pissed. Because y'all get to sit behind the gates while we die. And then y'all get to shoot us with rubber bullets while we die. We come defend ourselves and we dying. Defending ourselves. What kind of shit is that? So, hey, where that white guy go? Because it is the ballot of the bullet for black people. It is the ballot of the bullet. And I don't choose the bullet, I choose the ballot. And I can't wait till elections. Because I can promise y'all something. Y'all ass about to be extinct like fuck. I can promise y'all that. Y'all about to be extinct. Because the young people taking over. The young people taking over. We need some peace. Black people need some peace. White people need some peace. And we go out to fight, we go out to struggle, and we go out to struggle relentlessly to bring about some peace. Because the people we asking for peace, they're a bunch of megalomaniac warmongers. And y'all don't even know what peace means. So we got that fight, and we go out to struggle like hell to bring about some peace in this country. Y'all can stay behind the back lines if y'all want to, but y'all ain't gonna matter no more when the young people rise. Because I promise we gonna rise.
And I don't want to, I'm not criticizing that guy, the black gentleman who said that. But one thing I got to point out, elections aren't going to change this, unfortunately. Elections are not going to change this, unfortunately. We've had elections. This is embedded in American history from the time that the slaves were freed. If you watch, 13 on Netflix, they essentially just, when the slaves were freed, they just did some backdoor slavery, putting a lot of the freed slaves in prison to make up for that lost labor. This is embedded in our history. Elections, I don't think police could be reformed at this point. I used to. I don't anymore. I don't think you can reform this through elections, this and that, because at the end of the day, the culture and the system and the mentality of police are not to protect the community. They're just not. They're not to protect citizens, by and large. It's to have power over citizens and to protect capital. That's what happened at Standing Rock, and that's what happens in most of these cities. They're not actually out there to protect people. They're out there to crack skulls and protect capital. We'll see what happens with Derek Chauvin. My gut is he's going to be found guilty. But I think as more people are vaccinated, even before more people are vaccinated, I think we could have another mass mobilized protest again, like we did last summer with George Floyd. Unfortunately, I think the difference this time, I could see it getting a little more violent. I'm not urging that, but I could see that happening because at a certain point, don't ask people that are being executed to be peaceful. At a certain point, I wouldn't be peaceful if my family and friends were all being executed. So I could see another mass multi-state protest movement. Let me play that clip Jen was referencing of this 5th grade special education teacher. It's really powerful.
Well, the reason why I'm out here tonight is because I'm a 5th grade special ed teacher, and I work pretty much down the street at Garden City Elementary. And to be honest with you, while I'm out here, and it kills me because I know that my students, they have an older sibling or cousin that's literally walking these streets and driving these streets, and that could have been their brother or sister or sibling. So I'm out here fighting because I don't want them at all to feel that way and to ever get in that situation.
What do you think? How are these young kids, how are they going to prepare for the future to deal with this systemic issue that's been plaguing this country for years?
It's gonna take it's honestly like what we've been saying. It's gonna take a village. It's gonna take a village. It's gonna take us teachers that know what the system is doing to us brown and black kids. So we need to figure out which way we can teach them, and so they can learn on what ways to deal with the police. So situations like this do not happen at all.